thanks for joining. I'm Chuck Marino. I'm the CEO of Sentinel Security Solutions. I also serve on the board of advisors of Titan HST. So again, on behalf of Titan and myself, thank you for joining. And we're going to be talking about the recent NBA All-Star game and how it's unique in the sports world. And for that conversation, we brought in the Senior Vice President of Safety and Guest Experience for Smith Entertainment Group, owner of Vivint Arena, home of the Utah Jazz, Blake Paris. So thanks for joining, Blake.
Thanks, Chuck. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate it. We know this was no small undertaking on the part of Smith Entertainment Group and the NBA. So we just want to give some insight to everyone that joined us and discuss what the process was like for you and any recommendations you might have for those across all different sports leagues and large venues, and how to manage a large scale multi-venue event like this. So if you can give us some idea, Blake, of when the security planning started on your side and who was involved with that.
Yeah, so it was a multi-step process for us. Obviously, the NBA has its own book of business, and throughout the course of the year have large-scale events around the world. So it was difficult to get ahead of what All-Star was going to be requiring of us. So one of the things that we did to kind of set ourselves up for success was we started to have partner meetings about a year out, where different venues that we knew were going to take part in the All-Star festivities. And that ranges everything from the hotels to the convention center to the Huntsman Center, which is the arena up at the University of Utah. We were about a year out where we started reaching out to those different groups and those different partners to start talking about kind of the overall security posture and what that line of communication is going to look like amongst all of us. And what that did is it kind of set the stage for us to be more prepared for when the NBA does come in and does have certain requests or wants or needs during the All-Star event, that we're all on the same sheet of music where we can sit there and talk kind of across the board that this is how we operate and these are the things that we're doing. So for us, it was definitely getting ahead of the game by just getting into a room. I mean, and when I say partners, that's public and private. So we were in a room with Salt Lake PD, with Highway Patrol, with our Salt Lake Fire counterparts, all of us starting to talk about kind of what that footprint is going to look like, what the requests are going to be from the city for us when it comes to managing an event like this. And then also from a private sector, talking to the different groups as to here's what the NBA policies are, here's how we're operating our venues, and this is kind of what the look is going to be like within your settings.
Yeah, can you talk about, I know that the NBA All-Star game doesn't necessarily get a federal DHS special event designation, typically like a Tier 1 that the Super Bowl and the World Series enjoy. So how much of a strain did that put on the local counterparts at the state and local level, like, emergency services and law enforcement?
Yeah, I mean, there was quite a bit of a strain. And honestly, I think we leveraged all of the different entities to their max. It was very much a very thorough partnership when it comes to utilizing every aspect of what those different groups have the ability to provide for us. Just as a kind of an example of that, one of the groups that we leveraged was actually TSA. So TSA ended up bringing in K9 units to help support the things that we had going on here, because the requests for vehicle screenings and screenings of buildings throughout the course of the week and weekend were larger than what was normally kind of utilized by the city. So the city had a small K9 contingent, but couldn't actually address all of the needs that we had. So what they did is the city, and good on them, reached out to not only other law enforcement counterparts, but also something unique here is that the Unified Fire out here has a hazmat and bomb threat team unit built into their structure as well. So they brought their K9s in. And then obviously, like I said, on top of that, we then utilized TSA as well. So that leverage of resources was, I mean, it was vast. I mean, we took on counterparts from the FBI that came in and helped us out with the JTTF, as well as just their normal office agents that they have that were just extra support out in the field. We did it with Highway Patrol. So one of the roads that we ended up closing down out in front of the arena was a state-run road. So we utilized Highway Patrol to come in and help secure that footprint right outside of our arena. So we were definitely reaching out to those different resources. And the great thing about being in a market like ours is when a big event like this comes into town, it's kind of like all hands on deck. Everybody's willing to kind of put in their ability and their resources to try to make it the best event that you could possibly have. And the city of Salt Lake and the state of Utah kind of showed out when it came to what it was that we needed to accomplish. And you saw it within our resources that were deployed.
Yeah, it's important and reinforces what is said about relationships and having those established as part of an ongoing process instead of trying to establish those relationships just prior to a large event. So, that's great that you had those relationships, that the state and local police were able to reach out to agencies like TSA and and typically, as you saw, the FBI is also very good when there's large events out of their local offices. So, that leads me to, obviously you've put a lot of thought. And as a reminder to everybody, Blake oversees both security and guest experience. So, in balancing those two, which is a frequent topic of conversation at a lot of venues, you've got your day in and day out plan for jazz games. How did that change, and how did you adapt for the All-Star game? And did you see during that process the possibility of going too heavy on one side as opposed to the other?
With an event this size, you always have the ability to go heavy on the security, just because it's in your nature. You see an event of this magnitude, and the adverse effect it can have if something, God forbid, happened within that setting. So you always go heavy to begin with, and you kind of walk it back off of that once you start to get an understanding of the realistic abilities of something happening within that footprint or within that surrounding area. So what we ended up doing was we walked through kind of from arrival to the hotels to transportation to the venues, and then ingress into the venues, what that looked like. And within that piece is where we started to balance the real guest experience standpoint. So when they arrived at the hotels, a lot of the people that come in for NBA All-Star Weekend are not from the city that you're hosting the NBA All-Star Weekend in. So it was a lot of new people coming to this environment and not knowing, one, modes of transportation, and two, access into certain locations. So you have to kind of school everybody as to, this is how we do what we do within this footprint. So when they arrived to the hotels, our Visit Salt Lake team had little cards and QR codes that they can scan that gives them the information about the train systems that are running in and around the city. And then from there, it then goes into what types of things you're allowed to bring with you while going to those events. So that way you can offload those at your hotel before you even get on the train. And then once you're on the train, what they ended up doing from a security standpoint is they added additional UTA or TRAX officers. So UTA is our transit system, and they have police force within themselves that they would put onto the trains as an extra security element. And then offload of the tracks or the train onto the platform, and you have police officers that are there standing by at the platforms. And then the path of travel across the street. So you end up coming across guest service or guest ambassadors that are greeting you, kind of giving you the guidance of how do you get into the building, what are the different locations you can enter in from, where are the fan experience points that you can walk through as a guest coming to the building. So you really do like this juggling game from kind of arrival at the airport to travel to the hotel, and then from hotel to the different venues that you have operating. And like I said, you really start off at the high level of, this is what it takes to secure it, and then you walk it back as to how to make it more fan friendly and not make it feel like you're entering into a police state.
Yeah, no, fair points. To the participants, if anybody has a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A tab, and I'll try and make sure I get to it. Blake, just so everybody understands, how many different official sites did you have, different activations outside of the arena itself?
So outside the arena itself, we had 5 other venues that we were overseeing or had activations running in. Mind you, there was another probably 20 other activations that were happening in the city as well. So that was part of the juggle that we were doing, was because we know that there were sponsorship groups that were coming in and activating in different locations, and sponsors kind of run the different leagues, so they want to take care of them. So when you have the broadcast partners like TNT coming in and setting up an event at a different location that's not technically under our purview, but need our resources to be able to accommodate it. So there was definitely a juggling act for us when it comes to how do we pace out and piece out the different groups and elements that we have within our environment. So how does that work for the police? How does that work for fire? How does that work for our private contractors and our security for us to be able to handle those specific venues? And then how do we juggle the needs between those groups and us without actually giving up something on the back end when it comes to the safety and security of our facilities?
Yeah, so obviously you had to do additional assessments of those 5 other sites, likely in conjunction with the NBA. So, and at varying levels, I would imagine. So, kind of walk us through that and the role, if you will. Again, how you balance that security and guest experience, but also how you leveraged technologies, security technologies, and others.
Yeah, so the NBA has been very good. I had the pleasure of working with Mike Donahue, who's their deputy chief security officer for the NBA, and Sean West, Elton Owens, and Frank Walkup. So those are some of the names for the NBA that I worked with during the course of the weekend that had a part within different facilities in and around the arena and the convention center. They all had the same mindset as us, because it was kind of given to them as this is the path of travel that we're going down as the league, is to kind of really promote the guest experience side of it, on as well as handling the security. So when doing our walk-arounds and our site visits for all of these different locations that we were doing events in, that was a constant point of contact that we were having with our conversations, was guest experience. What does this look like? What does this look like for our ownership? What does this look like for our sponsorship? And how do we better outfit them with the information that's necessary for them to feel like they're having a great experience? And some of the technologies that we utilized were everything from our magnetometers, our walkthrough systems, to even our mass communication platform. So prime example is the company that's putting us on here right now, Titan HST. One of the things that we utilized their system for was we created the QR codes that were in and around our venue and exterior that allowed them to actually scan a QR code with their phone to be able to send in questions to our command center to get information as to door times, types of bag policies that are coming into the venue, the start times and end times of different events. Any question that they have when it comes to, from a security standpoint or from a guest relations, if there's a wheelchair request, they can scan the QR code and request a wheelchair. So it gave us the ability to reach out to people before even a human makes contact with them. They can be walking by and they see one of our signs that says, if you see something or need something, say something. So you can scan the QR code and message that to us. And it allowed us to get ahead of it. And it actually got a lot of traction when it comes to us being able to communicate with fans in and around the area.
Great, great. So you've got obviously the general public, you've got all the athletes coming in, and then you've got what are the normal package of the diversity of VIPs coming in to attend the event. So, that almost requires you to have an entirely different process, in a sense, in terms of the way those folks are greeted and screened. And so kind of talk to us about what that looked like. And I know at times that can probably get overwhelming at times for an event like an all-star game.
Very much so. And I think the biggest piece to large events like this, and kind of the one that always, it's the piece that always gets looked at as being the most important but gets the least recognition, and that's the parking and transportation piece. And what you run into with these large scale events is that everybody's somebody, and everybody needs to be dropped off at the closest location to the entrance to the building. So you end up doing the game of who's really important, who thinks they're important, and who isn't important at all and shouldn't even be in the conversation. And you got to walk through what those placards look like as far as those drop-offs. What does their security details look like? So you have a lot of high net worth individuals that are coming to the event that have their own security details. So what do you have to do with that? Well, you got to get ahead of it, where you plan timeframes before the big event to walk through and kind of run them through what your policies are, as far as no weapons in the building, passive travel for your talent, where their talent's actually going to be seated during the event. So that in itself is its own kind of working group, where you got to meet with all of the different EP groups and walk them through what it is that you're doing within your facility and what that path of travel is going to look like. And then working your way out, sorry, my automatic lights, working your way out of that is then trying to figure out, okay, how many vehicles do they have? Where are we putting their vehicles? What are their family members coming in? Where are they coming from? So you work through a lot of different logistical pieces with the parking and transportation. And if you can get that kind of cleaned up and narrowed down to a good fine science, it makes it easier on the ingress with those individuals, because everything's mapped out for them, the path of travel, the timing. Once you get everybody into the building, the event kind of it runs like a normal basketball game, in the sense of there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. So you have people in seats and they're watching the event, but leading up to it, getting through the logistical piece of all those different groups coming in, that's the hard part.
Great. We got a question here from James, and it takes us back to the technology topics that we were just talking about specific to Titan. So the question is, who do you have monitoring the Titan HST text requests, and what are the staffing requirements to do that? Is it the ratio of operator to guests?
So it's not a ratio of operators to guests, just because of how easy the platform is. It's very thorough. It's as if somebody's sending you a text message, and you normally don't get, if you have 16,000 people in the building, which that's actually a high number for what we had for NBA All-Star, because you lose a lot of seating because of the configuration. But you would usually put one or two operators that are down there that are kind of responsible for answering any questions or fielding any information that they need to push back out to guests. So one or two operators at the max would just be focused on that piece of it. But there really isn't a fine science to how many people you put in there, just because it depends on the number of requests that you have coming in. But the people that are actually responding to that are our experienced ambassadors. So basically, we have a security and guest service element that's a hybrid, and they fall under both. As an experienced ambassador, they're trained in security and they're also trained in the guest service element. And they have the entire run of show down in our command center. So they had the different trains that were running, they had the different hotels that were being utilized, where the different pickup points are for our rideshare program, the timeframes of the different event starts. So it made it very easy for them to be able to respond to any information that's coming in or any requests coming in from guests.
And is that run right out of your operations center? Is that where those folks are positioned with everybody else?
Yep, they're right in the middle of the heart of our operations center. So they're there with our police representative, our fire representative, our medical representative, as well as what we call our risk team and our report writing team as well. So they're all in one central location to be able to address anything that comes up.
Great. How about, one of the things that you have the benefit of is working at so many different types of venues, ranging from the NFL, the NBA, to other large events, and then obviously your government experience, which, for those that don't know, Blake was in the Coast Guard for a significant amount of time. And so what is the difference, if any, that you saw and deal with on a regular basis, but especially so for the All-Star game, what's the difference you see, if any, in the security planning and requirements based on the uniqueness of NBA games?
So the NBA is one of the few leagues that has direct access to players in the field of play. So that was one of the big things that is actually still a topic of conversation with the NBA as far as the screening process coming into a building. One of the things that's always talked about, and MLS is starting to look at this now too, because MLS is starting to build stadiums that have seats on the pitch. So that's starting to become a topic of conversation with them as well. But the NBA in its own right has its own concerns with people that are feet on the floor basically being within arm's reach of players that are running down the court. And it happens all the time where a player will dive after a ball and end up 3 rows up in fans. So it's more of a sticking point with the NBA as far as putting processes and technology in place that have the ability to pick up knives, not just firearms, but knives as well, because that's one of the things that they're worried about, is that somebody can ultimately pull out a knife and actually stab a player in the field of play, which is a kind of scary thought to think about. So what the league has to then go do is look back at prior cases, prior incidents that have happened, and then future cases as far as like, what is the possibilities as a percentage of certain groups being able to have access to certain types of screening processes because of who they are and where they're seated within an arena environment. So it's kind of one of those things that the NBA has a working group to get a better understanding of how they can tie the guest experience and the security element together, where they're not feeling as if they're entering into again, like I said, a police state.
Yeah. When you're working with your ownership group, and when you've met one owner, you've met one owner, right? They all have different priorities and concerns, but one of the things with large events like this that I think all the ownership across different teams and different leagues has is they always want to put their best foot forward, right? In terms of putting their venue and their teams in the best light. So what did you see from your ownership group and the company in terms of any special priorities, things that they wanted you to focus on, either on the security or the guest services side, that they wanted to bring attention to specific to Vivint Arena?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, so our owner Ryan Smith is the founder of Qualtrics, and if anybody knows Qualtrics or doesn't know Qualtrics, the entire platform is based off of experience. It's trying to figure out what the best means for the experience within whatever element it is that they're surveying you on. So the ticker for Qualtrics is XM, like experience management. So for him, the big push was Salt Lake City in the state of Utah. It wasn't just Vivint Arena. Obviously, Utah Jazz and Vivint Arena was the spotlight because that was where all the events were taking place. All the marquee events were taking place. But he really wanted to focus on showing off Utah as a state in a whole. And really what he did was he just created more events on top of the ones that we were already kind of running and taking control of. He created more events to add more element of energy to the surrounding areas. And those events that he put on were really encompassing not just NBA fans and the NBA crowd, but also the extreme sports side of it and the winter side of it. So one of the things that we did just behind our arena, there's a place called Gateway, and we put on it's called a rail jam event. So basically we built a 50-foot ramp that has rails on it, and there was a snowboarding event, and Shaun White came out and performed at it. Travis Scott came out and was an MC during it. So he was really adamant about making sure that people got the full feel of what Salt Lake City and Utah has to offer. And I mean, he stretched it out to Park City all the way down to Provo. So there was things that were going on in all of these various locations to really showcase everything that the state has to offer.
It's interesting in terms of everything, and that doesn't surprise me. I think it's great to highlight both the venue and the events specific to the NBA, but then also all the other things that cities and states have to offer with respect to whoever's hosting these types of events. But it's always amazing to me how, like the Olympics, and maybe you want to talk about this too, these are not money makers typically for the events that are hosting. So spend even more so is under scrutiny during the planning of these events for certain things. And so that's where you start to get the ROI, the return on investment questions from ownership. And so can you give us a situation where that kind of came up? And because they're going to want to spend on the things they want to spend on, and then they'll look to possibly do cuts or spend no more in other areas.
Yeah, and it's funny that the biggest piece to that, and you're 100% correct when you talk about these large scale events aren't really the money makers for the organization that's putting it on. The city will flourish off of it just because of the hotels and the different spends at the stores and shops in the surrounding areas. So those groups will do perfectly fine. They'll do phenomenal during that course of time. But the organization in itself that's putting on the event doesn't necessarily reap any benefits other than the ability to showcase everything that they have and what the environment in the surrounding area looks like. And for us, one of the things that we were always juggling, it wasn't necessarily so much within our organization walking back pricing. It was more so getting an understanding of what the NBA requested of us in various venues, and then what is required by the different production groups that are putting on those different either activations or events within those spaces, and walking them back off of what those costs are. So our situation here was very unique in the sense of usually you have a point person within those different venues that are running those events. But because our organization contracted with the NBA, and then we contracted the different venues that the NBA was going to be operating at for those events, our organization had oversight over those. So it helped us kind of get a better understanding of what the spend was in those locations and kind of talk through the needs or necessities for those specific things. And when you're talking about large scale events like this, there's a lot of just kind of minutia things that you put in place that you don't really think about, but at the end of it starts to run up a pretty hefty cost. So like we're talking about even pop-up tents, 10 by 10 tents that are sitting out in roadways in various locations around the city that have cement blocks and heaters and lighting being pumped into them. Like, you think that's not that big of a deal, but you put 50 of them out there and you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's really kind of going through those pieces of it and being kind of better at the logistics of where you need them and why you need them and the timeframes that you need them to better control the costs that you're spending.
Yeah, so we got one more question from James on the topic of money. And I think this goes back to what I was leading to, where the return on investment conversation in question comes up often, and how security is not viewed as generating profit. So what advice would you give to security directors who need to balance the security of an event with event planners who are focused primarily on revenue generation, right? And so probably this is the art of negotiation, I'm sure. So maybe you can give James and the rest of the participants an idea of those types of situations where, it's spend, but under the security umbrella, it's not going to sell to your ownership group, and how you have to negotiate all that.
Yeah, there's a couple different paths of travel with that. And I think that's part of within this industry, you become very good at the art of negotiation. And really what it comes down to is, one, getting an understanding of who your audience is. So if you know who your event planners are, if you're dealing with your event planners, or if you know who your executive team is that you're dealing with, you get a feel for how they operate and kind of what is their focus and what are the things that mean a lot to them. And you balance that off by having a talking point with where you can accomplish what they would like to see accomplished, while also maintaining your security posture and providing performance for your security team. So when we talk about technologies, the biggest thing that we run into, and Titan's a prime example of that, where I can utilize Titan to balance many different markets and many different departments within that system. So I'm getting Titan put in as a platform for our venue, but while doing that, I'm also selling it to our marketing team, to our sponsorship team, to our operations team, and they're getting a feel for what that looks like and what it provides for their general operations within their environments. So really balancing out kind of what the end game is for those event planners or for those executives, and then trying to figure out what that gray area is where you can meet in the middle, but get accomplished what you need to get accomplished. So I'll give another example, just because that was kind of vague for just that specific piece, but another example would be bomb screening coming into a building. So one of the things that we always talk about was, well, you got to have x-ray machines put up so that way you could screen every bag. Well, it's not always feasible to put an x-ray machine in place to be able to do that. So where do you meet in the middle? Well, you want to be able to say that you've put your best foot forward to screen different items that are coming into the building. So rather than using an x-ray machine, which costs $8,000 to buy to be able to put in place to screen, well, maybe you bring in a dog for 3 hours during that time frame, and while your line is lining up outside your building, your dog is walking the line. It's not actually interfering with the guests coming in. From a fan experience standpoint, people actually like seeing the canine because everybody loves dogs. So they're looking at it as more of a fan-friendly aspect to kind of screening them for explosive devices. And ultimately, you're getting done what you need to get done. You can sit there and say that you've had the people that were coming in were getting screened for carrying explosive devices. So you really got to find that gray area and try to figure out how you can meet in the middle where you're hitting your obligation for what it is that you want to accomplish from a security perspective. And then also from a event planner, what are their shortfalls, or what are the things that they're focused on that are going to make them not happy with an event? And you put guests in a line going through screening, and they stand there for 2 minutes. It's 30 minutes to them. So your senior leadership is hearing that they were in line for 30 minutes. You could pull up video footage and show that it was 2, but in their mind, perception's reality. So how do you change that, and how do you manage that gray area? And I think just playing that game back and forth is gonna win you a lot of respect from all of your different departments, as well as giving you opportunities to kind of utilize other tools to be able to accomplish what it is that you're looking to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be tough and a kind of a constant state of negotiating during such a large event, because like you said, you're working across so many different lines of business that have individual goals, right, for their own line of business. And sometimes those are in direct conflict with security, or may not make the guest experience process as enjoyable as it should be. So you're right. It is a balance, and great job, getting through all of that. What were some of the things that jumped out at you as you were nearing the event itself, and then also during that, you thought you had planned for adequately, and that you realized, you know what, I think we're still short here, and something could not go in our favor leading up, or did not go in your favor during, and you had to quickly adjust?
Yeah, and as I stated earlier, I think the biggest piece to an event of this magnitude is definitely the transportation piece to it. And I'll give his name's Reiner, their head of transpo for the NBA. That guy a lot of credit, because he has a huge weight on his shoulders when it comes to maintaining events of this magnitude. But one of the things that you always run into is that the group that's supposed to have the placards never gets the placards, and the VIPs that are supposed to be in certain areas at certain times never show up at those areas at certain times. So I think the element of working through that is the biggest piece to the event, and the thing you look back on and say, man, I wish we came up with just an alternate way of addressing that when it came to fruition. So I think looking back at that was a big piece to one of the things that we could have done differently was how we managed getting them their placards, and even having additional ones on hand. So when those individuals show up in their vehicles and we vet the fact that they're supposed to be in that location, even though they don't have their placards on them, that we have the ability to issue out a placard at that moment to just identify that that vehicle has, one, gone through their security sweeps, and two, belongs in the area that it's about to go drive into. So I think those are that's one of the biggest ones that I could think of. And then the other one is the court. Not so much during the All-Star game, but more so during the slam dunk, 3-point, kind of the skills events that happened the night before the All-Star game. I think having additional resources down there is something that we had a lot, but redeploying more from the upper areas down into the floor, just because everybody during dunk contests wants to get up onto the court and surround the court, and maintaining control over the space that players are activated in was one of our challenges. It looked great on TV and everybody was happy with the way that we handled it. But I think just from a security perspective, it was one of those times where you look at it and it had the ability to go wrong. It didn't, but it had the ability to, just based off of the numbers that were trying to kind of push their way forward. So that way they can either capture whatever it is that's happening on their phone, or just be front row to what it was that was occurring. So I think that is the other piece that I think we could have done a little bit differently.
Got it. No, that's good to hear. I mean, we know, right, in real life, not everything is going to go as planned, and usually those that you're planning for are the ones that are going to throw a kink in your system, and that you need to adjust for. One of the other important areas here, and we got a question from one of the participants, has to go with the importance of, I think, communication and information sharing. So you've got all these disparate organizations, you've got your state and local agencies, you've got your own internal stakeholders, you've got the NBA personnel. Can you talk about the role that technology played, and it could be all types of technology played, in making sure that information that was a priority was being shared in the right way and received by everybody that thought they should have it and actually needed to have it? And then the same thing with communications as well on a daily basis. How did you leverage technology to achieve all of that?
Yeah, so I mean, the question kind of fits directly in hand with the platform that we're talking about, and that is putting on this presentation, which is Titan. So what I ended up doing was, every entity has their own system in place that they utilize, whether it be the NBA, PD, fire, you name it. They have their various ways of communicating. But what we wanted to do is kind of make a unified way of being able to push messaging out and get things across to the different stakeholders in those different venues. So one of the things that we did is we created a kind of master list of who the points of contact are between all of the different entities within those different spaces. So we had our incident commander for fire, our incident commander for PD, for the NBA, and for our house management in those various locations. And then what we did was we created a kind of communication tree in Titan, where we had the ability to push messaging to specific groups at specific times. And we had that as a use case. We had we all know in large scale events, kind of people come out of the woodwork that try to either sneak in, or all of a sudden we're past employees that think that now they all of a sudden work for the venue again and want to have access into the building. We have all those different use cases during the event where that happened, and we had to push messaging out to the various groups that here's what's going on, here's the individual, what they look like. And one of the things I like about Titan from a communication standpoint is you have the ability to attach pictures and video and things like that in your messaging that you push out to those different groups. So utilizing technology in that regard, and it's not hard to set up. I mean, you literally can within a day set up an entire event within Titan and be able to actually utilize it in that manner. So
and that fell to you, Blake, to say to all these different groups, look, I need no more than 2 people that want to receive communications, and then share that information with whoever you deem needs to have it within your own organization. Is that how that worked?
Correct. And from a use case standpoint, we had an individual that actually jumped a fence and tried to sneak in through a back door into our arena. So what we ended up doing was we put out an alert to find this individual. That alert went to the different points of contact with PD. Those contacts at PD then put it out through their system, and a police officer on one of our corners of our block actually found the guy, and he ended up getting hooked and transported, getting arrested. So there was definitely a use case, and it showed, and it worked in our favor the way that we had it mapped out.
Yeah. What were some of the things that you had to step in and kind of either take charge of that doesn't normally fall under security or guest experience, because it just fell through a gap? We know you can't assign everything. There are things that come up, and sometimes they're going to fall through a gap if somebody doesn't step up and say, hey, you know what, I'll handle that and make sure it's taken care of. Were there just one of those instances, or were there a lot where not just you but other teammates with the Jazz had to step up and say, you know what, yeah, we're concessions, but yeah, we'll take this on too?
Very much so. And it's kind of open-ended as far as everything that our teams took on during that All-Star weekend. We were everything from doing deliveries to hotel rooms for swag bags, to providing concessions for ownership groups that are seated on the floor that can't get up to go get their food or beverage. So our security staff really, our security and guest experience staff were very heavily utilized to kind of put on operations across the building and around the different events that were happening amongst the city. And I think, it was kudos to Ryan for really pushing the narrative of, like, we're all in. This is you're going to see the best of Salt Lake City that we have to offer. And the way that he did that was really kind of empowering everybody to say, hey, we're all not any specific job title this week. Like, we are all willing to jump through hoops and run through fire. So and it was shown just from his leadership standpoint. I was here one morning at 3:30 in the morning to meet Ryan, who was doing an interview with a media outlet, and that was at 3:30 in the morning. And I was then with him 1 o'clock the next morning for the Board of Governors meeting, or Board of Governors event. It was ending at 1 a.m. So he went from 3:30 in the morning until 1 a.m. the next morning, doing interviews, going to every different event that was happening that was under the NBA and Smith Entertainment Group kind of purview for All-Star Weekend. So lead by example. Our owner, who literally has the ability to pick and choose what he wants to go to, went all in and was at every single event, making sure that everybody was happy with what was going on. So it made it very easy for us as an organization to kind of step up and say, hey, you know what, we're going to put our best foot forward. And if there's things that we need to do that are outside the realm of what our job responsibility is, we're stepping up and we're doing it.
Yeah. So I'm reading a question right now. Okay, this is always a good question. If you were to get a do-over for the whole event, what would you do different? Anything come to mind?
That is a good question. It's hard to answer a question like that when your event ran as smoothly as ours did. I think the biggest thing that we would do differently would actually probably be try to do more activations in various locations, and the planning process behind trying to do those. I think we were very much hard charging as far as trying to put on so many different events that there were certain aspects of it that I wish we planned a little bit more on, because we could have been a lot more successful in what it was that was being put on. But it really is a hard thing to say, yeah, I'd do that differently, when that event was, as seamless and smooth as it could possibly be.
Yeah. Did you guys, and I know sometimes the majority of times for large events, the leagues will bring in tabletop exercises. Did you tabletop prior to the All-Star game?
Yeah, we did a small tabletop with, well, the league did with Prevent Advisors, or OVG, their
Mhm,
security group.
mhm.
But like I said, one of the things that I was appreciative of was all of the different entities around the surrounding area were very much on board with, I want to get ahead of this. So about 8 months out from All Star, 6 months out from All Star, we took it upon ourselves to meet with our protective security advisor for DHS in the state of Utah, and we put on our own tabletop exercise that we invited the NBA out to, and we invited all the different entities out to, and it was a large scale one. I think we had about 80 people in the room.
Mhm.
Um, to do this tabletop. So it got to the point where the NBA looked at it and was like, yeah, we'll do one with Prevent Advisors like we do as a standard before the event. But we really capitalized on everything that we needed to capitalize on by us putting on this tabletop long before theirs was even set.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. I mean, you know, all the players, they know the protocols, right? The arena's there each and every day hosting all sorts of events. So definitely the tabletop exercise with everybody that is going to be part of that operational plan should be walked through various scenarios. And I think you did exactly the right way, because it ensures everybody's, you know, playing off the same sheet of music, and also understand what their expected roles and responsibilities are. So yeah, no, that's great that you did that. Now, have you gone through the after action process yet? And will there be a Utah Jazz Vivint Arena process and then an NBA process?
Yeah, so there will be a debrief amongst all. I actually already did our NBA debrief. We're doing a in-house debrief next week amongst all of our different various departments within Smith Entertainment Group. So we're kind of doing that process now. A lot of the things that people don't realize is that once the event's over, the event's not over. So you get through the physical piece to it, and then you have to get to the administrative piece to it. So closing out the event and settlement and all that is the real kind of the grit side of the event, because you have to dig into making sure that you're submitting all the different bills and various things that come with the event that you just put on. So we're at the tail end of it now, but for weeks after the event, that's the focus.
Yeah, how about the reporting side of that as well? I can see and understand the billing part of it, but were there situations that may have occurred during that, you know, few days where you hosted the events that you're still reconciling issues, be it, you know, somebody that was unhappy with the length of time it took to get in, right? We know it's lost items, things like that. What does that level of reconciliation look like after an event of that size?
Yeah, we have a couple of scenarios that are a lot like what you just said. So yes, the lost and found piece to it is also a big thing, because like I said, a lot of these individuals that come in for the event are from out of state. They're not from the surrounding area. So we'll have wallets or bags and stuff that are left behind. And what we end up having to do is go into the wallet and find the driver's license and see if we can reach out or contact those individuals that left stuff behind. We had a young lady here that left a wallet filled with cash, and she never even called to see if it was here. And when we reached out to her to tell her that we had the wallet and the cash, she was beyond grateful, and we ended up mailing it to her. So she got all of her items back. She just
Right.
assumed that because there was cash in there, it was gone, and that just chalked it up to being a loss and having to go get a new license.
Yeah.
And from the other side to that is then the medical piece to it. So we had different medical incidents that occurred during the run of the weekend, and going through and one, making sure that documentation is clean and concise, and two, if there's any follow-up or after action for the different medical incidents that occurred. And then if there is there anything that we have to involve our legal team with, because is it going to
Mhm.
become more than what it was at that time?
Right.
So
Right.
those things are definitely things that we're still working through, and that you would continue to work through, I mean, for months on end, until you get to a closure of whatever that incident is.
Yeah. How about the media? Obviously, you know, probably double, trip, maybe even triple the size of media attention that you normally get for a regular NBA game. How did you manage all that? I mean, from the satellite trucks to the specific requests from networks to be in the arena at all these different times to conduct interviews. How was that? Because that's an additional tasking in and of itself.
Yeah, it's very much understanding the logistics side of it, understanding the footprints that's needed for those different groups. So to touch on the satellite truck piece, we ended up having to permit out an entire road that they parked the satellite trucks on. That happened to be the same road that we ended up doing vehicle screening on. So we got kind of a 2-for-1 off of permitting that road. But then the footprint and the paths of travel for all of those different media outlets, making sure that one, they're clearly defined entering into the space. So knowing what door they're coming into and having directional there to be able to get to those specific areas is a big component. And then staffing. So one of the things that you run into with this is that you just assume during the day is the hard part. When you have guests and stuff coming in, but it's really not. The hard part is the load in and the early morning hours of these events, because you have your local, your stagehands, the different media outlets that are coming in that are all getting there early to set up and do what they need to do. So making sure that you have the adequate number of staff members at those different entrances to be able to accommodate the needs of the individuals coming in, because you might have different media outlets that are doing stuff outside the building but need to be inside the building at a certain time frame. So they're all in a rush, and if they're in a rush, they're coming to your doors trying to kind of push their way through, not in a bad way, but just that they're hurrying to try to get their job done. So how do we make sure that we have the staffing and the resources available to accommodate those needs? Because ultimately, if you make the media happy coming into your building, the word is going to get out that this place was great and it was a great experience. So that was one of the things that we focused on.
Any and we've got about 8 minutes left, but I'm always curious, was there any additional training that you would recommend doing for both contracted staff that's hired to work the events and also internal staff prior to a large event like this? Anything that you think, if you had to think about it, maybe that you did, or maybe that you would have done in thinking about it, that you would say, you know what, if these folks had, an additional specific training for an event like this, it would be this.
Yeah, I think within the industry in itself, the hardest part to train is the credentialing side to it. So I think if you had and we can all go down the road of like, if they had additional x-ray training or they had additional magnetometer training, those are kind of like standard use cases that you would have, whether it's a large scale event or not. Like for a normal Utah Jazz game, you want to have additional screening trainings for all of our staff, just so that way they become thorough with it. And it becomes muscle memory to them as to how to operate and how to do that job. But for large scale events like this, you never get the adequate amount of time to be able to go around and brief each staff member the logistics behind the credentials. So it's one of those things where like the day or two before, they might give you a sheet that has 30 different credentials on it. And now you're bringing in a guard the day of to go stand a post, and you're handing them a credential board, and you have credentials that are marked off that they can't go down that path. But if that credential is escorted by this other person, then they can go down that path. And so like the convolutedness of what a credential board looks like, and having additional time to be able to walk your posts and talk to your different team members as to paths of travel, it would do twofold. One, it would empower your staff to be able to adequately address the people that are coming up with credentials. And two, it would give a better guest experience for the people that are carrying those credentials, because ultimately, if they're supposed to be in those areas, they'll be addressed as so. And if they're not, they'll be addressed as so. So there will be no miscommunications happening as to who's supposed to be going where. And I think that in itself is kind of a job by itself, is being able to kind of talk your staff through what that process looks like.
Yeah, the credentialing very often is the thing that can trip up your staff most consistently, and most of the time, I think it's almost like overclassification, right? In the government, we tend to at times over credential, and we break it down into a specific credential for this particular hallway, and I think sometimes it's made a lot more complicated than it needs to be, and sometimes, like you said, you're putting the staff, whether contracted or internal, in a bad situation where they just cannot understand, based on the volume and the complexity of credentialing systems at all these different venues, what ultimately they're there to do. So that's good. Well, look, Blake, I think you gave us a lot to think about for sure. Congratulations on getting through this. I can tell you that you know, the word is that, as you described it, this was as flawless as you can get for a large event as you can. So congratulations to you know, the NBA for working with you to pull it off, and all the state and local agencies out there. And finally, thanks to everyone that took the hour to tune into this and listen to Blake. And I think he brought a lot of great points out and a lot of things to consider for not only the next All-Star game, but I think for any type of large event that you may be hosting in the future. So we'll tune out after this. We will make the video of this presentation available online. And thanks to everybody again for joining, and take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Blake.